Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to kind of do a crash course on common aftermarket brake issues that we've seen. All the components have to work together. So we'll break them down piece by piece and kind of give you a little insight on what we've seen. So this is a Mustang. We didn't build this car. It just came into us for some small repairs, one of those being the brakes. He was complaining of a hard pedal, not feeling like there's enough brake assist, not feeling like there's enough braking power based on the amount of pressure that he's putting on the pedal. There's a variety of things that can contribute to that, but we'll just kind of start at the front of the car. I'll work through each components and give you some of the things that we're looking for and try to help you understand a little bit about what might be going on. This is something we see all the time. So if you've got a hot rod at home, maybe you're experiencing this. If you're putting it together yourself, maybe you're experiencing it. Maybe you bought one. It's a really frequent issue and it's something that's kind of a big deal. So it's good to know a little bit about it and understand it to help be able to fix it. This car's got Wilwood brakes on all four corners, which might lead you to believe it's gonna stop great. It's got Wilwoods. And that's true if they're set up right, but you might also put Wilwood brakes on your car and now it stops worse. A big part about brakes is understanding the application. So single piston stock front disc brake might actually feel and stop better if it's not set up correctly compared to a Wilwood. Wilwood brakes are more performance oriented, so they're gonna work better under higher heat and so on. So that's kind of a misconception that we've seen. Oh, it's got Wilwood or Bear brakes on it, cool, it's gonna stop great. Maybe not. This is the Wilwood brake conversion. The rest of the suspension, I believe, is relatively stock. Something that's really important with the higher performance brakes is that they get bedded. The bedding procedure varies a little bit from manufacturer, but I'll give you an example of what I would do with these brakes. The bedding process is heating the pad and the rotor and giving them a good surface to mate together. If you don't get them really hot, essentially right out of the box, they can glaze over and create a film over the surface and they will not work as good. You basically either have to get new pads if they're really bad or sand them down, sand the rotor, sand the pad, and go and bed them again. The bedding procedure is you drive the car a little bit, like normal driving, get them warmed up, and then go get up to 50, 60 miles an hour and make a pretty aggressive stop all at once, all the way down to zero. Go do that again within less than a minute. You want to get it again while it's hot. I do that 3 times. By then you can smell the brakes and you're like, okay, these things are hot and it's working. I like to go and drive them a little bit more and allow it for like a slow cool. And then often I will go do it again after they've completely cooled off. So typically the performance brakes especially will come with a bedding procedure. You want to follow that, and it's really important to make sure those pads work as good as they can. Another thing is when you go to an aftermarket brake, typically because they have more pistons, it is more surface area, which translates to a little bit more fluid to move all of those pistons. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we touch on the master cylinder. Another thing that isn't usually an issue that we see, on occasion it is, when you change brakes, you need to make sure your brake line routing is good. A lot of times these brake lines, you have to change the location of the hard line or put bends in them. You just want to make sure that, especially in the front, as that tire is rotating, it doesn't rub with the brake line. Naturally, of course, OEM stuff, you just put it back on when you're redoing the brakes, but you got to be a little more conscious on these cars. Have the suspension loaded, turn the tire, and make sure it's not going to rub. And then when it comes to master cylinder and brake booster, one of the most common things we see is people don't match the bore diameter of their master cylinder to the brakes, to the booster, to the pedal ratio. Common sizes of master cylinders are 7/8 and 15/16, which are typically manual brake application. Then you go up 1 inch, 1.1 inch, and even 1.25 inch, and those are typically a power application. Selecting between all of those can be a little bit difficult sometimes. You'd be amazed at how just jumping one size up or down will make in pedal feel everything. It all relates together. So what essentially that bore diameter is doing and what it's changing when we change it within one system is the amount of pressure that it takes compared to the amount of fluid that it's moving. So if you can imagine an 1.25 inch is a larger diameter, it is going to move the fluid faster, so it's going to take more force. A 7/8 is a smaller diameter, so it will take less force to move the fluid because it's pushing less fluid. So that's where you go, like a 7/8 would be manual because you don't have the power assist of the brakes to aid in that. So you have to have a longer throw to achieve the same amount of fluid movement, essentially. Hopefully that kind of makes a little bit of sense. It's just a really important part of this. Another reason to buy good parts, buy from a reputable source. When you buy Wilwood brakes, you can call them and tell them what you're doing, and they will help recommend a master cylinder size. That is super helpful. Master Power Brakes is another great company that we work with. They're always super helpful in those types of selections because it matters to what pistons you're using. Like I mentioned earlier, the amount of pistons in the front caliper means more fluid, which means more fluid needed from the master, and it all plays together. So master cylinder selection is super important. In addition to the master cylinder, you have the proportioning valve. And on this car, it might be hard to see, but the proportioning valve is right kind of just below the master cylinder. This one is a Wilwood. It's fully adjustable, which is what I like to use in aftermarket stuff. OEM stuff, they're standard, basically preset, but that sets the bias from the front brakes to the rear brakes. What you basically need to do is dial the rear braking pressure down a little bit, because as the vehicle comes to a stop, about 60–70% of the braking is on the front, the rest on the rear. It takes a little bit of weight off the back, the rear brakes, which allows them to lock up under a slightly less pressure. So if you don't turn that down, you'll come to a stop and the rear brakes will lock up. That becomes dangerous when you go into a corner, because if you're cornering and you have to hit the brakes harder than you would expect or whatever it is, and those rear brakes lock, you start slide. Best case scenario, when you come into a stop and lock up all 4 tires at the same time. That's what that proportioning valve is there for. Another really important thing to making sure these brakes work well. That is overlooked probably 99% of the time, to be honest. But another thing related to the master cylinder, not applicable in this application, but when we put master cylinder underneath the car, typically in like 30s cars, we have to do what's called a residual valve. The reason being is we don't have any head pressure from having the master cylinder above the calipers. So you have to put an inline residual valve that keeps just a tiny bit of pressure on it, and it avoids them from bleeding back too far and just holds those calipers in the right spot. That's important in those 30s and 40s and sometimes 50s cars, so that's really common. I keep saying they're all common issues because, like I said, this is such a common thing. It amazes me how many times this gets done wrong. The brake booster is very important. Vacuum brake boosters, which are most common still, need at least 18 inches of vacuum. When I say inches of vacuum, it's inches of mercury, which is just a measurement related to vacuum. That is pulled from the manifold typically. And oftentimes when you have an aftermarket engine or an upgraded engine, it's got a bigger camshaft in it. Or like people say, does that have a cam? No, it's cam delete. No, you know, that's freaking stupid. With the aftermarket camshaft, especially at idle, they typically pull lower vacuum, and it just is due to the overlap of the cam and the valves. And that's part of like the really good thumpy sound. That creates an issue with the vacuum booster. That was part of the issue on this car. This car only pulled 11 inches at idle. That basically gives you less assist. I mean, it's very simple in that respect. Where it gets a little more complicated is understanding how to fix it, for one, and if it's really a problem. So this engine idles at 11 inches. When you go drive it down the road, under throttle, the vacuum drops a little bit, but on decel, it jumps right up to 20 inches. So that's plenty of vacuum. That almost creates like an intermittent issue, and that's can be hard to diagnose. Anything intermittent is hard to diagnose. So when a customer comes in and has that, and they're not even really sure what's going on, because they're like, sometimes the brake assist feels really good, sometimes the pedal's really hard, that would lead me to a booster issue. That's exactly what was happening here. Reason being, you start the car up, you got 11 inches of vacuum going to the booster. The booster has a check valve in it. If you're only idling, you've only got 11 inches in the booster built up. As I said in the last video, is this guy wanted to cruise in Enumclaw. So going downtown, you're just idling and chugging along. You're working on 11 inches, so the pedal's super firm. You go to drive it and you get that 20-inch spike every once in a while. That check valve holds the vacuum in the booster and gives you 1 or 2 pumps that feel really good. So now you're kind of confused because it felt terrible cruising. Now I just hit the highway and now they feel great. That is due to the check valve in the booster, which is good. That tells us at least the check valve is working. The check valve is not actually there to overcome that issue. It's there if your engine dies, it gives you 1 or 2 more pedal strokes to get this vehicle stopped, basically. One thing we did on this car, knowing that the booster was suspect of being the issue, is we actually put a vacuum gauge, and we've done this many times, run it up under the hood and stick it to where you can watch it from inside the car. And you can see, sure enough, started up 11 inches, cruising it about 5, and as soon as you decel, the load on that engine bumps it up to like 20. In this car, what we're doing to fix this issue is we're putting a vacuum canister in. Today, Matt mounted a canister up in the wheel well, and this canister's job is to give an additional storage of vacuum. Most applications, if he's driving slow in that 11-inch vacuum range, he'll have 3 or 4 pedal pumps of 20 inches of vacuum stored now. So vacuum from the engine goes into here, and then it goes out to the booster. This reservoir has a check valve in it too, so it creates 2 or 3 extra pedal pumps. That's all there is to it. So the next thing that we can do if the customer doesn't feel like this is great is actually put an external vacuum pump in, and then the engine will be removed from the equation completely. The external vacuum pump would draw that 18 inches of vacuum, shut off, turn it on and off on its own, and create a standalone system. That's pretty much everything up front. The next thing that we have left is the pedal. A very common conversion, well, one would be doing disc brakes on a car, of course, upgrading to Willwoods or just disc brakes in general. Another thing would be changing from manual brakes to power brakes. When that change is made, just like how I talked about the master cylinder being different bore diameters for different applications, the pedal ratio is also really important for how the pedal feels, how much assist you have. What we do to measure that is we measure the distance from the pivot, where the pedal mounts to the pedal assembly and pivots, down to the pedal pad, which is where your foot's going to be pushing, and divide that number by the distance from the pivot to the push rod that goes into the master cylinder, the booster or the master cylinder drag. And that gives us a pedal ratio. A pedal ratio and a power brake system, probably going to screw this up, I have it written down like this dusty paper I've had in my toolbox for 10 years, is like 4.5 to 6 is a typical power brake ratio, pedal ratio, and then it's about 7 for manual. 7 would be a longer stroke for the same amount of travel at the push rod going into the master cylinder. 5 would be a shorter stroke for the same amount of travel. You can do a shorter stroke because you have power. A lot of times we've seen when people do a conversion from manual brakes to power brakes, they don't correct the pedal ratio. It's a surprisingly small amount of movement in the push rod, and oftentimes manufacturers will have 2 holes already there, but super common, and it's amazing. You change a pedal ratio from 5 to 6, the brakes will all of a sudden feel great. It's that little bit of ratio and levers that play into that as a crucial role. I have some friends that do like sprint car stuff. We're building this custom brake pedal setup for the Charger. It's like this whole trick underfloor mount with rods that go back and hide the whole booster and everything. And I mentioned pedal ratio and his like eyes lit up because he knows how big of a deal that is. And we both related, like everybody overlooks it. Nobody knows how important it is and what a difference it can make. I'm hopeful that with this video, you guys can understand a little bit more about brakes. And honestly, ideally, you're working on your own car and this helps you out. And if you have anything else you want to learn about related to hot rods, this is stuff we do every day. So we've got all kinds of things that are normal to us and maybe you'd like to hear. So if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out, ask us, drop us a comment, like this video, and stay tuned for more. I hope you can follow this.
You're doing pretty good.
Okay, all right.
Pedal.
Push on the pedal.
Stop.